What's going on, y'all? We're back for another book review on the channel, and let me tell you, today we got a doozy. It's a very controversial piece of literature and probably one of the most disturbing books that I have ever read, and that is Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian. So before we go any further, there's going to be a lot of graphic content mentioned in this, so if that's something you're not looking for, or something you're just not interested in hearing, don't even watch the review. Just skip it. Watch something else on the channel, because that's what this book is. It's full of it. Also, I want to go ahead and preface by saying that this is a book I read before I started the channel, and I've taken a lot of time kind of collecting my thoughts on it. So I'm going to be referring down to some of the notes that I've kind of collected, because this isn't a book I can just freely talk about. There's a lot going on in this book, and I want to make sure that I truly represent my thoughts that I've collected up until this point on this insane piece of literature. So first and foremost, let's get into the plot. So this is set 1850s in Southwest America, Mexico. You have our main character, who's the kid. That is his name. That's how he's referred to throughout the entirety of this story. He is from Tennessee, and he makes his way to the Southwest U.S. and into that northwestern territory of Mexico. And he encounters a group of Indian scalp hunters, and he joins them, and the plot is that it follows them along as they commit just truly despicable acts. That's basically the plot. So, like I said, the first big issue I had with this book is just the style of writing. So there was this specific narrative choice that Cormac McCarthy had to make, and that was that he chose free indirect speech as the narrative style, which I didn't know what this was before I looked it up, because it's something that is so bizarre and so out there that I was like, I don't even know how you would classify this. So it feels like someone is telling you a story in person, and they're telling it just over the shoulder of the characters. So they tell it like they were there, and sometimes they jump into first person when they're telling the story, but they weren't really there. And it's very confusing to follow, and like I said, it's told like an oral tale. So a lot of it doesn't have proper punctuation, and that was an intentional choice that he made when writing it. And it feels so hard to read, and it's confusing because you're missing punctuation, and sometimes the sentences flow through and there should be like a comma or a period or something. And honestly, it tripped me up a lot more than I thought it would. It was just something that made this book so much more difficult to enjoy, but it was a very specific narrative choice that he made. Next, I thought the prose in this was awful. I really thought Cormac McCarthy was this excellent writer, and this was not a great first outing, because this was the first book that I ever read of his, and I feel like for pages it would just drone on about something that really wasn't important, and then an important story beat would happen in a paragraph. So I really struggled just reading pages of just droning and droning on. Now I will say there's from what I've heard, Cormac McCarthy is an excellent writer, one of the greatest American writers that's been produced. And there's nuggets in there, and I see, like I said, I think a lot of this is just down to the choice of the storytelling method that he had, but a lot of it is just kind of bland. And then there's a single paragraph that is just jam-packed full of important stuff that you need to know to realize that, oh, this character is now dead, and just stuff like that. And then lastly, I think the content was just lacking mostly. Like I said, it's a very graphic book. It's 351 pages, but there's really no plot. Nothing really happens in it. So it just feels like disturbing scenes followed by them writing and them talking, more disturbing scenes. And I don't feel like, and I'm okay with graphic scenes happening, but these felt like they were just of no significance and they had no purpose. And it's just a sequence of bad things happening, and we're just watching it happen over the shoulder of these characters. And that was something that just didn't set right with me. And I feel like maybe that's him saying, like, that's just kind of how life happens. It's a series of events that happened in no specific order, and they just occur, because that's what it felt like. And like, the characters were not good. Like, there weren't good characterizations. The kids, mostly forgettable. Then you had characters like Toadvine, Glanton, Captain White, Brown, and Tobin, who just were they were people. They didn't really have any interesting things about them, no depth to them. They were just pawns moving along in this hunt for Indian scalps, and that was it. Like I said, I have to reference it because I remember the kid, and that was it, because he's the main character. But he's the person we spend most of this over the shoulder of, and I barely remember much about him, and I had to reference this sheet just to know the other characters' names. Now, there's one character who is a massive pro and one of the most interesting things about this book, but I'm going to get him later. And like I said, the disturbing nature of this book is going to be a lot more than most people are wanting to handle and get into, but it is the entirety of this book. Like, if you cannot handle this type of writing, or this type of content, then this is going to be a book that you just need to avoid, because first and foremost, there's extremely racist language throughout the entirety of the book, which is exactly what you would think is Cormac McCarthy did not hold back. This is exactly how 1850s scalp hunters would talk. If you think about like what their dialogue would sound like, and how they would talk to each other, and how they would talk about these natives, it's spot on. I think he definitely hit every check there, because it is brutal the way they talk about these people. They talk about them as subhuman and stuff, and just, it is hard to read sometimes and hard to just digest. This is not a light read at all. This is one of the heaviest and densest reads that I have done probably the past year, if not more, maybe ever. I don't know. It's a lot, and it's a lot to think about. So, and like I said, there's just super graphic depictions in it, depictions of scalpings, which is the premise of the book. Just brutal fights, like gun fights, fist fights, knife fights. There's rape. There's one specific scene in it that, like I said, it depicts these infants which have been spiked on trees, and like, it's just like, it didn't feel like any of this was for purpose, and that it was just kind of like, this just happened. Like, this is what they came across when they found it. And like I said, it's just brutal, and I don't know how a lot of people could read this. I just did it because I heard that this was some excellent book and some exquisite piece of literature, so I needed to see it through. So if you've gotten this far in the video and none of that stuff has stopped you from being like, well, I want to read this, or like, I still want to check this out, if you can get through all those things, there is some gold here, and some great content, and some good stuff that you can kind of really think about. It's very thought-provoking and real deep, in my opinion. So first and foremost, it's not really a pro, but it's something that really stuck with me. To read this book, and then to kind of think about that time and that history and what was really happening at that time, it got me looking into, what life was like in that time, and was this really historically accurate? And horrifyingly enough, it is fairly historically accurate. I read one instance, one story of, in 1867, in the Colorado Territory, a town sponsored an Indian scalp fund of $5,000. They were offering $25 per Indian scalp, with one condition: that the ears were attached. Age, size, none of that mattered. So it could have been men, women, children. They didn't care. $25 for a scalp as long as it had the ears. And that was just horrific. And like I said, this is real history. So this is probably a pretty accurate depiction of like what was going on. And that is just horrifying to me. The next big pro is the character that I said earlier was the only character that stood out, and that is Judge Holden. He is such a mysterious character, and he's just so strange and bizarre, and he stands out, and like he's something that still sticks with me and I still think about from time to time, even after it being 4 or 5 months of me not reading or actively like thinking about this book. And he's just such a bizarre character, and he plays such a central role in the allegory of this book that you just can't help but be interested and intrigued by him. And like I said, the biggest pro of this book is that it pushes the boundaries of what is acceptable in literature. I'd say that this is true, like one of the epitomes of like transgressive literature, and seeing like how far is too far, and kind of pushing that boundary and seeing like kind of testing what we can handle as humans, and what, even though like this is historically pretty accurate in some of the content that it's depicting, and that these are things that people really did, and just kind of toiling with that less than 200 years ago this was a fairly realistic depiction of the state of our country. And that's a lot to think about. And like I said, I think McCarthy really had to dig to his depths to kind of write this book. Like he had to dig to the deepest, darkest parts of himself to be able to put this to page. And it's so interesting to hear him talk about like what man has to offer and just the warring nature of man. And like I said, when I was talking earlier about those little nuggets of gold, there's these quotes that just like, oh, they just make you think so much. And there's one quote in particular that stuck with me, and I just wanted to share that with you. And that is that war was always here. Before man was, war waited for him. The ultimate trade awaiting its ultimate practitioner. And it's just so, think that quote's so deep. And just to hear him talk about the warring nature of man, and just how we are its ultimate practitioner. Like it has always been and it always will be. Long after we're gone, war will be awaiting its next participant to explore the depravity of it. And just thinking about that as the warring nature of man, and the kind of toiling with what humans are really capable of in that just dark, nasty sense is just a lot to think about. And it's a lot of, it's very thought-provoking, or at least it was for me. And I kind of was like, man, like, what have humans really done? It got me digging more into just the history of what humans are able to justify and what they're truly capable of doing. And it's horrible, some of the things and some of the atrocities that humans have committed on each other. And like I said, I think this book's just an incredible allegory for that warring nature of man. And I think that's really what Holden is embodying, is this predisposition of human beings to worship and engage in war. Though it's unavoidable, that it's just this innate state of human beings that we are constantly going to be fighting over something, for some reason, for a piece of land, for some cultural difference, for some higher being and belief. Like, it's just human beings' nature. And that's a tough pill to swallow when you start really diving into what that means, and you look at all these other examples throughout our time, and even just in our lifetime, like events like 9/11 and stuff like that. What human beings are able to justify is truly harrowing. And like I said, that it has left me thinking a lot about just these type of topics. And like I said, it's one of those things, like, if you keep in mind of what this warring of Holden embodying, this warring nature, a lot of his actions and a lot of things that I didn't think made sense thinking about the book until I really started thinking about what Holden was and kind of just the general nature of this book and what it was supposed to be. A lot of things start to make sense that go on in the book when you think about it from that lens. And lastly, make sure you're in a good headspace if this is a book you decide to read. This is, like I said earlier, this is the furthest thing from a light read. This is dense, this is heavy, this is grotesque, and it's going to weigh on you. Like, this is not something that you should be able to read and just shrug off. Like, this is something you're going to have to toil with for some time if you really read it and really dive into it. And like I said, this is not a book for enjoyment, but a book to really just explore the depth of human nature and kind of get you thinking about topics that aren't really fun to think about. And like I said, this is not a book I would ever recommend to anyone. But if you heard something in this book review that has interested you and you think you can get beyond those just big pros and those big like stoppers that I struggled with, then this is definitely a book you should be checking out, and this is something that you should be kind of toiling with. You know, if you got the guts to get through it, then I think there's a lot to be learned from this wild piece of literature. So, like I said, y'all, if you got the guts, it's something you should check out. But this is not a book I would ever recommend to someone. That's going to be entirely up to you based off what I've said in this review, or what you've seen in other people's reviews, or what you've read about the book. It's going to be a very personal thing, a very big undertaking to sit down and really commit to this book, or at least it was for me. But that's all I got for y'all. Like I said, if you like this type of content of me doing a deeper dive into really thinking about books and what they have to offer and really diving into literature, let me know what you guys have thought about this book. If you have a different view, a different idea of what the book's talking about, please, I would love to hear it. This is something I am very passionate about discussing. I feel like I've been reading a lot of fiction lately, so please let me know what you guys think down below. And until next time, stay reading, y'all.